When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds or Skims, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and brilliant marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. And the not-so-secret secret? With Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform better be ready to sell whatever your customers are scrolling or strolling on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Skims uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/try to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/try.
And Arnie Sherman.
You're listening to What Do You Know on Newstalk KGVO, AM 1290 and 98.3 FM. Arnie Sherman, a good Sunday morning. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I was out in California for a few days looking at ocean and sun, and I'm revigorated and glad to be back. And I'm excited that we have Dan Carlino, our 24-year-old newly elected member of City Council representing the U District, coming on. I love to see young people who get engaged in politics, and he is a great example of someone that's, came out of the University of Montana, ran for Public Service Commission, now got elected and began his term in January. And I'm anxious to hear what it feels like for him to be an elected official and a public servant.
Well, and many people may know this, but this politics and local politics is part of has been a big part of your career over the years. And so, yes. This is great that we're making an introduction to him at the outset of his term, so we can follow him all the way. We can
follow and see how he goes and how he does, and we can create a Carlino scorecard.
Exactly. Okay. Well, back after this break, we're going to have our guest, City Councilman for Ward 3, Dan Carlino, back after this. Okay, we are back with our guest, Dan Carlino. He is the City Councilman for Ward 3 here in Missoula. Dan, how are you?
Doing pretty good. Thanks for having me on, Scott. Always happy to talk to everybody.
Well, Dan, tell me a little bit about your background, because I'm fascinated with anybody that, elects to get involved in serving the public in a council or a local government seat. Is this something that you've always wanted to do, or is it something that, that you've always planned for? Or give us a little background on what got you here.
Yeah, it's definitely not something I planned on doing. What kind of got me motivated into politics is that my main passion is trying to protect our environment and outdoors. And I was an environmental studies and wildlife biology major at the University of Montana here. I just graduated a couple years ago, and that led me into the activism world of trying to protest and get involved with politics. And I was mostly trying to push some of our federal level politicians to take on policies that are going to help us stop the climate crisis, and policies that I think help meet everybody's basic needs and push for. Basically, I've just been trying to push our politicians in the right direction for the past 4 or 5 years, and that just got me frustrated with watching all politicians kind of fail us on the environmental.
You figured you join them. You figure the best way to influence is to actually join and be participatory.
Right. Yeah. Be a voice on the inside of the political conversations as well, rather than just trying to get them to change from the outside, which I have had some successes with, but mostly most politicians are pretty stubborn and have a lot of different influences going into the decision making. So it can be hard.
No, I was going to say, now having done it for at least for several months, have you learned about how the process works better, and have you adjusted kind of your approach to how you do things? Or, is this what have you learned, quite honestly, in the last several months?
Yeah, I've learned there's a lot that the city council can't do that I wish we could, but there's definitely a lot the city council's in charge of. The main things are kind of making up our city budget every year and where all the city funds end up going towards. We help make local laws and pass local resolutions. And we also decide like the zoning of the town on like what can be built where and things like that. So it's one of those things that you have to either go to all the council meetings and pay a lot of attention to really know what's going on or just be in the room. But I'm trying to do my best to get somebody else, another communications person hired for the city and trying to do my best with staying in touch with people, like in letters to the editor and through social media and things just to.
Well, you're very active. You're very active in social media, and that's how I'm imagining a lot of folks are familiar with you. Two-part question. Question one is, now that you've been involved, is the pace of change and the pace of progress moving slower or faster than you had envisioned?
Much, much slower than I'd imagined. To get anything passed, we have to basically vote on it. And we have to have at least 3 or 4 different meetings about each item, it seems like, because everything goes through the city staff. And then eventually it'll get put onto the committee agendas. So the city councils have different committees that make up the different sections. Like we have a land use and planning, we have a conservation, finance, things like that. So everything. Yeah. Everything will go through the committees on Wednesdays first, and then we bring it to Monday night city council meeting, and then sometimes it'll have to be voted on like three or 4 times. So things move really slow.
So are there any committees that you're more passionate about than others?
I think the land use and planning committee, I think is super important because it has a big impact on our environment and on housing and deciding like what with the zoning that goes through the land use and planning committee. I think it's a really big deal. I'm also really excited about the Parks and Conservation Committee because we deal with a lot of environmental issues there. And I'm also just trying to help make sure that everybody's got access to recreation with our Parks and Rec. But all committees have fun things going on, a lot of interesting things going through. So
absolutely. And I promised a second part to my first question, which was one about progress too, is how about the communication with your constituency? How active are you? And I think you mentioned something about social media, but what are the different, platforms that you're speaking with them on? Are you doing door to door? Are you doing kind of like a retail approach, or are you using social media? Is it all of the above? And how active is your constituency?
It's all of the above. And right now, so for the past 2 years, city council's pretty much just been on Zoom and online. And, so I think that's curbed a little bit of the participation from people that would normally show up in person, might not be as interested to show up on a Zoom meeting, but it sounds like we're getting back in person at the end of the month here. But I'd say people are pretty active and, or really opinionated, at least on social media and talking to their friends. And a lot of people really care about Missoula and what's going on here. And I'm trying to just help share with people how to come comment online or once we're in person, trying to show people how to come comment in person. So I'm trying to do my best to bring in more public participation. And one of the other council members, Kristen Jordan, and I are about to start weekly office hours, on Mondays when people can just pop in and talk. But so far, we get emails or phone calls almost every day that I just try and get back to everybody that way to talk about the issues and things. But I'm trying to hold weekly office hours. And
where are those at? Where would you be holding those? At the
they're at the library, actually. Yeah, we're on the third floor of the public library. I just have to get it added onto the city website. But the main way I've talked to people about all the issues is that we took it door to door, and we knocked the entire Ward 3 over 3 times. Some of the doors 5 times, when we were campaigning. So I plan to take it door to door myself, at least 1 or 2 rounds, during my term as well, just to check in with everybody. But I personally knocked over 10,000 doors and tried to talk to as many people as I possibly could. And that's how I really think I got the best sense of what people care about in Missoula and what's going on.
And for our audience, can you define Ward 3? What are the main streets that define in that segment of town?
Yeah, Ward 3 is a lot of the slant streets. It's most of the U District and the riverfront area, and also anybody who lives on campus at the University of Montana. So it's from the University down to Russell Street, and then it's from the Clark Fork River over to Kent Avenue in the U District. So it's kind of a big
hot zone
square. Yeah, it's a really exciting ward because we've got the university and we've got river, and there's a lot of development and things happening in this ward too. So a lot of moving parts.
Well, I'm curious. You have, if I'm not mistaken, you had actually tried and ran for city council one other time before.
Oh, I ran for a public service commission.
Okay, for PSC, and that you didn't make it that time. But what did you learn in that process that helped inform when you won? In this most recent election.
Yeah, well, I was going to the Public Service Commission regulates Northwestern Energy, and as somebody who cares about our climate and environment, I was often going to try and comment to them to change their energy plans. And basically, the Public Service Commission has tended to vote alongside whatever Northwestern Energy wants for the most part. And right now, they're planning on building 4 new gas plants in Montana and also raising everybody's energy rates along the way as well. So I was going to comment against them, and I was 20 years old or 21 and didn't really know much about politics at all. But just from looking at the 5 people on the Public Service Commission, just one of them was falling asleep during the meeting, and a lot of them just were kind of reluctant to hear people out. So I just decided to run right then. And next, I didn't realize that my opponent was going to be raising like over $100,000 in the primary, and that there's just really no way to run a big race like that without raising a bunch of money. So that's one thing I learned is that if you want to run for a big race in politics, you kind of have to raise money. But with the money,
by the way, was that money raised from private donations or corporations or a combination of both? That's a lot of money.
Yeah. Some of it, I think, is PAC money, political action committees that individuals can put money together. But most of it is individual contributions. But basically, for city council, for example, I raised about like $7,000, and my opponent raised about like 16 or so thousand. But then they also got another few thousand in PAC money from this PAC was from like the Missoula Organization of Realtors and the National Organization of Realtors. They ended up spending about $20,000 in the Missoula City Council races as a PAC, and you can't really track who all sent money to the PAC.
Right, exactly. Dark money.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. Everybody hears about it on the national and at the state level, but now we're talking about the local city level, and it's still very important. So if you had, let's say, a third of the money that your opponent had, why did you win? Like, what was it that you did differently that you think brought you to win the seat?
I think the main thing was that everybody's watching Missoula change fast. The prices are rising really rapidly. And I ran with affordable housing as my top issue because that's the most pressing issue that Missoulians told me that they were dealing with. And I was also the only renter running out of almost 24 candidates running for local offices. I was the only renter in town running or for city council. So I think that helped as well with people just wanting a little bit of representation since half our town is renters. And I think we also just got out there and talked to, like I said, I knocked over 10,000 doors, and with the help of volunteers who believed in my more progressive message, we knocked about 20,000 doors and just getting out there and talking to everybody about the issues and hearing them out. And I brought forward a lot of like concrete plans, like rather than just saying like, we're going to work to stop the housing crisis or working to protect the environment. I tried to be really specific in things that we can do to help with some of the issues I ran on. So I think people appreciated having a plan.
Well, I loved your approach to social media, and everything you did, you were recording and reporting on. You were reporting on yourself, which I think lent a great deal of credibility to your campaign. And at the same time, it really, and truthfully speaking, it felt like you were really actively out there. We were just doing it as a vanity project. It's like you wanted to accomplish something.
Yeah.
And that's important. I think that came through as very authentic.
Thanks. Yeah, definitely.
Now, well, your generation, why don't you furnish us with a little background on you? Like, where are you from? How did you get to Missoula? And, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, I grew up mostly in Atlanta, Georgia, actually, where I was living like in East Atlanta, DeKalb County there, and just kind of, and it's all concrete, no forest or mountains or anything like that. But I've always been more of a nature lover. And I had some cousins and aunts and uncles that lived in Missoula decades ago and now live over by Bozeman as well. And they told me about Missoula. And so just when I was after I'd graduated high school, and then I started just working at restaurants and things, but then I was looking to going to school, and I moved out here mostly for the beautiful mountains and rivers and, everything that we love about Missoula, and also just to be a student at a school that's got a good wildlife biology and environmental studies program. So that's kind of what brought me to Missoula, and just going to school here and being surrounded by like a beautiful environment for the first time in my life, or getting to live in a beautiful environment, really helped trigger me into activism and action to try and work to protect it. Yeah.
But Dan, you've been in town now for 5-6 years.
Yep.
What's your pitch now as a city councilman? What would you say to people about, moving here and, the pros and cons of Missoula, and, how do you represent the city, to outsiders as an elected official?
Yeah. I think, Missoula is clearly a really special place. Everybody here really appreciates being surrounded by such a beautiful landscape and having our river through our town and lively community. And I mean, it's definitely something that, has been discovered. I think the statistic was that for every one person leaving Western Montana last year, 7 people moved in. And we're growing really fast. And, I'm not one to be negative towards outsiders. I think it's something that Missoula needs to a problem that Missoula needs to take on and realistically think about how we're going to keep this place affordable and still keep a good quality of life in Missoula, and still welcome refugees and people from across the country as well. So I think, I just want to let everybody know how awesome and special Missoula is. And I think, if you're somebody that's looking to move here, just trying to get acquainted with the culture of Western Montana and appreciate the people that have already been here for a while, and try to figure out how we can all make it work together and still keep it as special as it has been.
Well, Dan, here's the conundrum that you have in every other city that I go to. I just spent 10 days in California, and I went from San Francisco all the way to LA, and every place I stopped, it was a similar kind of conversation.
Yep.
Which is how do elected officials in a free market control affordability? Every place I've been to, bar none, is grappling with accelerated costs of housing, accelerated costs of construction, wages not growing as fast as, cost of living. We have inflation like we haven't had in 20 years. We have a war going on that's impacted the cost of gasoline. Gas was $6.99 a gallon in LA.
Oh, yeah.
So people are yelling and screaming. You can't blame the mayor for that. You can't, or even the president. What is Joe Biden going to do? He's going to call up Exxon and Mobil and yell at them and say, lower your prices. Then
right.
People are going to say he's a communist, right? It's a free market. You should be able to, charge what you can charge and get away with what you can get away with. So this affordability issue is a complicated one because you need workers, to do service jobs.
Right.
But workers can't afford $600,000 homes. Definitely.
It's definitely something that is on the forefront, I think, of all of the council's mind. And, like when we're living in the free market, it's definitely hard to ensure that we are keeping everything affordable when there's always that pursuit of profit that all of our laws seem to uphold over meeting people's basic needs. But at a local government level, I mean, we got to still try and do what we can. And a couple ideas, like, for example, with housing that the city council must take on if we want to try and keep this place affordable. One, we're rezoning the entire city or doing a code reform process over the next 2 years. That's about to start here soon. So, like, for example, in a lot of neighborhoods in Missoula, you only have the option to build a single family house that takes up 5,400 square feet in landscape. And I think we need to be able to open up all neighborhoods to allow for duplexes or fourplexes, for example, to help build the supply. But people are moving here rapidly still. And I think we really need deed restricted, we need to think of ways that we can take these basic needs like housing off of the free market. And one example is when we use our TIF funds, tax increment financing funds here in town. Basically, the city uses a pool of money that we have, about over $30 million per year for redevelopments. And when we use those TIF funds, then we can require things from the developers. So on city council, whenever we're using TIF funds towards housing projects, I think we need to request a very large portion of permanently below market rate affordable housing. And basically that's how we can, that's one strategy towards, I
gotta be honest with you, speaking for my wife who develops properties here and refurbishes old places, she says it's very difficult to work with the city. One hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing, and there's a communication challenge. Have you heard that? And if you have, what can you do to help solve for that?
Yeah, that definitely seems to be an issue too. Like if just to get the permitting process and get all their paperwork done can take months and months before you can even start developing something. And that's something that we're taking on in this code reform process as well, to try and get rid of some of the red tape per se of why it takes months and months and months and approvals to even start building, I think is one thing. The communication is something that I think we can always work on. And I like, for example, like the big public input processes like we did with like the downtown master plan. But communication between like council members and staff, I mean, that's totally up to us how good that's going to be. We just have to keep reaching out to each other.
And also removing like the single points of failure. I mean, I was amazed when she told me, I asked about where we were with this process. I fixed this request, but they said he's on vacation, so no one can approve it until he gets back from vacation.
Yeah.
I'm like, that doesn't work because of two things. One is it shouldn't work that way. It's not progress. It's not, it's not proactive, nor is it take into consideration how difficult it is to line up resources to actually do the work.
Definitely. Yeah, there's really no time to waste. Like every month that we wait to go through all the paperwork and stuff is a month, lots of more people moving to Missoula in that time. So
right.
It's a really difficult issue. And, I really do believe in trying to take as much as we can out of the free market for basic needs like housing. And I see that as one way. And a lot of council members and local government just see it the best way as build, and ensure that we can build as much housing in town as fast as possible. And I think that also helps and could be a part of the solution. But I think doing that without disrupting the free market in any way is not going to really solve the problem either.
So here's an interesting observation. One of the things when I listen to you is you're very excited about being in local government. I mean, it's very hands-on, right? It affects your daily life. It affects the people living next door to you. And you're now in a leadership position, and you're relatively young. Mm-hmm. When did you decide that public service was going to be your, pursuit? And what did you study in school? And what have you learned since you graduated the University of Montana that helped prepare you for a career in public service?
Well, I was an environmental studies major in wildlife biology at the school, and that's what got me more into just sitting down in the classes and realizing how bad the problem is in every possible way you could think of. Then I'm just thinking of, well, we need big solutions, and who's in charge of, protecting our natural land, or who's in charge of the way we're going to get our energy. And I looked at the politicians, and I was just like, you guys just are deciding on these pipelines coming through Montana or this fracking project. And I'm just baffled that such big decisions that affect all of us are decided on by such a few amount of people. So I would just start going to their events and raising my hand and trying to get the microphone and I would just spend a lot of time pressuring politicians. And then that's what made me want to run, just because I could only take so much, no from them. Yeah.
So, right.
Yeah.
So everybody knows this public information that a city council member makes only about $15,000 a year.
Yeah.
So everyone subsidizes their work on city council working somewhere else. So where do you work?
Yeah, I work, it's funded by the state. I work directly with a family they have a son that has different mental disabilities. And basically I work as like his aide. So I do that part-time in city council, the other part-time. Like as an aide, we'll just go like work out together, go shopping, grocery shopping, go do stuff outside, just kind of enjoy Missoula. So it's kind of just a aid job to help a couple different people with mental disabilities go throughout their daily life and just have like a good quality of life. So I've been doing that for about 2 years now.
So you now have two altruistic careers. Public service and, working with people with, special needs.
Mm-hmm.
What's your longer term vision? Where do you see yourself 5 years from now, Dan?
I have no idea. 5 years ago, I definitely wouldn't have guessed I'd be on city council. But my plan is long term is just to keep working on, trying to stop the climate crisis and trying to work to, ensure that people can get their basic needs met in the United States. And so I see that either as like working for like an organization that works on the issues, or just keep chucking away at politics and see what impact I can make here on city council.
Sure. So you just started your job, in January?
Yep. Yeah. So I've been on here for about 2.5 months.
Right. So taking on city council is baptism under fire, right? Your first day you're in there. You're making decisions and you're looking at cases and you're trying to, make informed decisions. Let me just bring one up, for example. While you've been sitting there, the city resolved its lawsuit with the Carlyle Group, right? And is going to pay them $4.3 million, and pay debt service off every year for a number of years to pay it off. How did you feel about that settlement?
I mean, the Carlyle Group is definitely one of the more evil investment groups in the country. But personally, I think, having publicly owned utilities is a huge asset. When there's a big corporation that owns our literal drinking water in town, that's a big liability, because I think their pursuit of profit will outweigh Missoulians' needs to get water in the future, or outweigh the environmental infrastructure needs that the water system is going to have. And I think internet, energy, water, etc., should be owned publicly. So I was happy to help settle the long process of buying their own water company, but Paying the Carlyle Group millions of dollars for a settlement obviously is not something I really wanted to vote for and support, but it was just basically it would have carried on longer, and the city could have ended up having to pay them even more. But I'm just thankful that we own our water company, and I'm going to try and keep the water rates as affordable as possible and not increase those any more either.
There's nothing more, it's water and air, right? Are the two basic commodities on this planet. And, as you know, recently a number of corporate types have said, water, it shouldn't be free. Water, and it isn't free. We pay for,
right.
for water.
It's not free anymore. Yeah.
No, it's not free anywhere. And, the West, as you know, in the history of the West, is checkered with huge battles between, ranchers and, cattlemen and sheep herders and all of that over water. Water has been one of the number one issues beside God that has spurred on, battles and fights historically and contemporaneously around the world. There are fights in Africa, all the time over water,
right?
Yeah. Who has access to water? So while Missoula is, in a different set of circumstances, I think you're absolutely right. The public ought to own the water, and even if they have to pay something for it, it's better than letting some global conglomerate that doesn't live in Missoula, doesn't care about Missoula,
right?
And their mantra is, maximizing stockholder profits, not making sure that everybody has access to quality water. It probably was good, a good experience for you to see
definitely.
get settled,
to see that,
and know that the public is controlling, the spigot, so to speak.
Let's do a quick ID. Our guest is Dan Carlino. He is the city councilman for Ward 3 here in Missoula. Dan, getting into politics, the decision to get into politics, did you have any mentors or guidance from anyone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think whenever I decided to run for Public Service Commission, I just wanted to go for that one because I know that they regulate the energy grid, and I saw that as a good way to help. But no, everybody suggested I run for legislature or try and work for a nonprofit or get on a city board or something like that.
Who is everyone?
I guess people like in the activism world, or if I would like knock on somebody's door that thought I was too young to run or something like that, they would just come up with their own suggestions and things. And I just felt like running for Public Service Commission was the closest matchup as I could to trying to solve a problem as big as the climate crisis. So it seemed like with such a huge problem, you got to try to make a big impact, and it seemed like the right position at the time.
Were you welcomed with open arms by our career politicians here?
Oh, no, absolutely not. No. No, when I was originally, before I had ran, I was one to go call out politicians for things that I didn't agree with and try and put them on the spot publicly to get them to take a side. And I would do that with anybody from like the federal level down to the local government. So I felt like I already had a bad reputation around some of the elected officials. But like for when I was running for Public Service Commission, I didn't have any political endorsements from elected officials in Montana, while my opponent had almost every Democratic one. And same with when I was running for city council. I think I ended up with one public official endorsing me, opposed to 20 that my opponent had endorsements from. So it seems like it really helps to have all the other politicians on your side if you're running. It kind of is
Didn't seem to help your opponent though.
Yeah, I think it helped with fundraising and maybe, but with most people I think in town don't really care about endorsements like that.
It actually helped you.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing, Arnie, I'm curious to know this though. Do you think that has to do with the fact that people are so anti-politics? Like an endorsement is like, wait a minute, something doesn't smell right here. I like this guy who is going it his own, right? And he's kind of blazing his own path.
Well, the issue really is, if in politics, is if you don't have any endorsements, you kind of eschew them But if you got a lot of them, you thank everybody for endorsing. If you have
Right.
the AFL-CIO, or if you have, the public service workers, or, you're proud to have their support, your endorsement. Whether they can deliver all of their members is, a whole totally different question. But you had the advantage. You said you were young, but young is relative. You represent the U district in the slant streets. The average age in that district is a lot younger than some of the other areas in Missoula. Mm-hmm. So you look more like somebody who might be running for office, or knocking on doors, in that neighborhood than you would in some other neighborhoods in town. And you talk about activism. I just want to bring up the point. I did a lot of youth advocacy work in my previous careers, and I was in the same building with Saul Alinsky, one of the great legendary community organizers, operated in Chicago. And he never used this term, but it was used by a number of other people. There's a thing called, as John Lewis, the late congressman, said, good trouble, right? And there are good things that happen from speaking out and taking, positions. That's what, that's what a democratic society is all about, not being one-sided, not waiting for the senior elders to pat you on the back and say, it's your turn. Right? It's never going to be your turn if you wait for that. The classic example of that is Barack Obama. You think if he sat around and waited for them the senior leaders of the Democratic Party to turn around and say, now it's your turn, Barack, to run, you think he would ever have been president of the United States? I doubt it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, your attitude and approach about, things, and the luck of, at least for city council, being in a district that's probably favorably inclined to someone your age, does not see age or youth as a hindrance, but sees it as an attribute that you're young and fresh and have good young, new ideas and all of that. But let me switch to something a little bit more sober for a second. The mayor, it just came out publicly, as he always does in his great candor and directness, and talked about, battle with cancer that he's now undertaken at 58. Right. What's the feeling among city council members when they heard that, and how do they feel now?
I definitely feel bad for Mayor Engen, and I think he really does, try to, in his mind, do what's best for the community and is working hard. And so I definitely feel bad, and it seems like he's planning on trying to finish the whole term. But yeah, pancreatic cancer is obviously tough. But it sounds like Gwen Jones is the city council president, and she's ready to step in. When I was reading the charter, it looks like that if the mayor does have to step down, that Gwen would probably fill it for the meantime, and then at the next general election, the voters will be able to decide. So I think the city council is kind of just sad about it right now. We all got it together yesterday to test out the equipment to see if we can get back in person for city council. And we all had to talk to Mayor Engen, and it was just kind of a sad moment, like with anybody in your life when, they've got that diagnosis. So.
Right. And particularly for somebody like you, when I remember when I was your age, way back in the previous century, the illness and death of people was not a common occurrence as much as you get older, and I remember the first few times I met somebody, or had a friend or a colleague who did pass away. It was a disturbing and sobering, experience, because, in youth, you believe you're going to live forever, right? I mean, you're not thinking about your retirement planning right now, Dan. You're thinking about, what kind of change agent you can be, and how you can get, the policies that you certainly have, have learned about and aspire to see it being implemented, and changes in, environmental and climate issues and the things that are important to you. You have a whole career, focused on trying to do that. So you don't think about, the inevitability of something like that may happen long time down the road. It was surprising to me. I mean, he's a long-term fixture, the longest tenured mayor in the city. He's, 58 years old, still relatively young in, this day and age. And so it was surprising to hear about that. Scott, you have some family experience with pancreatic cancer, and a bunch about it.
Yeah, it's a devastating, very fast acting form of cancer, but there have been a lot of great technologies and innovations that over the last 10 years that have really helped not only extend the life of somebody who has pancreatic cancer, but to turn their life back to normal and to buy them a lot of years. And I'm hoping that's what happens here because obviously, John's a friend of our show and a friend of ours. Not just the mayor of our town, and he's always been very accessible and very candid with us. And what have your interactions been like with the mayor, since you kind of got into politics?
Yeah, well, honestly, like a few years ago, my interactions were more of me just trying to try to pressure him, like as just a politician, and I didn't know him as a person, and try to pressure him to do things that some people in the activism community are asking for, and kind of he was pretty accessible, honestly, to be able to talk to. But now, since being on city council, he offered all the council members to meet a weekly or however often you want. So I've been doing weekly meetings with Mayor Engen, and I'll usually go in with a long list of policy ideas and just kind of run them all by him. And we seem to be aligned on a lot of the issues. And he's a pretty good source of knowledge for things. So it's been pretty good to work with him so far. I mean, we don't agree on everything, but we at least get to have good dialogue and debate about issues. And I get the genuine sense that he's trying his best to take on all the issues.
Right.
So, yeah, we've had a good working relationship the past couple months.
Well, as you know, living in a community like Missoula, which has a reputation of being a liberal community by and large, but there certainly are elements in this town that are not liberal. You can look on social media and that, like everywhere else, there's a wide, array of perspectives and beliefs about how things ought to be, and a lot of armchair quarterbacking. What are the issues for our listeners, Dan? What are the issues that are coming up that you think the citizens of Missoula need to be paying attention to?
Like a broad issue, like affordable housing, or like a specific policy thing that's coming up?
A specific thing that is coming up on the agenda that you think people ought to be paying more attention to.
Yeah, I think one thing that gets a little bit underlooked is our tax increment financing funds, TIF, and they're used for redevelopment, and we have about $35 million per year roughly for redevelopment. And for example, one thing, there's a lot of positive that's come out of it and some things that I don't always agree with. One positive thing that I saw coming up is that the old railroad track between Broadway and the baseball stadium, we're thinking of building to the side of that bridge, using the existing infrastructure to make a bicycle and pedestrian path. Mm-hmm. And I think public infrastructure and affordable housing and things like that seem like a good use of TIF, but often for example, we've used millions of the city council has approved millions of dollars for redevelopment of Stockman Bank, of the Marriott AC Hotel and things like that. And I think it's up for debate, but I think people should just be really on the lookout of how we can use these TIF funds to help with our affordable housing crisis in Missoula and also help with infrastructure. But I'd say the number one big issue coming up in the next year and a half on city council is the code reform and rezone of the town. So typically, the city council will get a request from a developer or from some a lot owner to rezone to allow for a new kind of business or to allow for more density on housing. And we're basically have the opportunity as a community to rezone the entire town within the next year and a half to help meet up with our goals. So you can think about how far do I have to drive to get to childcare or to a grocery store or to why is there only single family housing in this neighborhood and this neighborhood has a bunch of apartments and things like this. And I think we can use this rezone to decide as a community what we want Missoula to look like in the future, what we want Missoula to feel like. And we can use this rezone city reform code process to to just help decide what our community is going to look like in the future. And I think it's going to be a pretty big deal. And that's going to be starting here in the spring. And it's going to be a long public input process.
Well, that would be exciting, interesting, and and it is something that people ought to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Public-private partnerships in governance, have always existed. We have large corporate clients in town, corporate citizens like the Washington Corp or the hospital or some others. But this town has a unique demographic, which is it's a university town. Mm-hmm. And the university, dominates a lot of what takes place in Missoula. What kind of relationship, influence, pressure, what kind of dialogue goes on between city council or even you specifically related to the university?
Yeah, I haven't had too much so far, but one thing that's kind of a hot topic between the university and city council now is that parking is really tough for students and faculty to find parking on campus. And there's about 1,000 parking spots in the university district, which is in my ward, that are residential parking permit spots. So people that live here can pay a amount of money and have and use the residential parking permit spot. And the student government at the university this past week, and also the Board of Regents are talking about this. They're wanting to eliminate the residential parking permit, or at least change it to give back those parking spots to the public rather than to the residents that pay for them. And that's going to be a really controversial topic because people love their parking spot. But I think just with things like the city street, that's obviously a publicly owned thing. From my perspective, I'm mostly just always thinking about how we can give all of the most benefits to the public as a whole and not really side with private interests when I can.
Hey, reduce our carbon footprint by requiring more people to use mass transit and to walk and not have as many cars and parking spaces.
That's definitely a big part of solving the parking issue is just let's make it easier to not need to park and drive everywhere.
Arnie, they solved the parking issue in New York City by removing a ton of parking spaces and replacing them with outhouses that operate as restaurants, right? As restaurant extensions.
When I was doing work in Italy, they had so much congestion in the heart of the cities that the city council came up with a thing where your license plate ended with an even number or an odd number, and so on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday you could drive in if you had an even number.
Oh, right.
Tuesday, and they thought they solved the problem, except that everybody with money went out and bought 2 license plates.
Oh, wow.
They just gave the license plate on their card, go in whenever they wanted to.
Ingenious. Let's take a quick break. Our guest is Dan Carlino, Councilman for Ward 3 here in Missoula. Back after this. Arnie, we are back with our guest, Dan Carlino.
Dan, we can't stop our conversation about Missoula without talking about bears in Missoula and Bear Smart. So tell us what's going on with that.
Well, we're the home of the Grizzlies here in Missoula, and I think everybody's really proud of that. But for the first time in many, many decades, we're seeing grizzly bears come into town in Missoula. There's a family we've had brown bears and black bears in Missoula, more often than we should. But for the first time ever this past year, we've been seeing a family of grizzly bears in the North Hills over by the peace sign coming into town and being spotted more and more. And basically, this is an issue of their habitat destruction, bad use of trash and deterrence, bear attractants and things in town. So Missoula, there's some grizzly bear scientists in town that are trying to work alongside our city council and county commissioners to make Missoula a bear smart city, which becoming bear smart would basically mean that we need to have a educational program about what it means for us to live in bear habitat. And it also means enforcing some basic bear deterrent practices like using bear-proof trash cans if you live around the bear buffer zone, things like that. So it's going to be a long process that's going to take a lot of education, but ultimately we're hoping that we can live in harmony with the bears and not end up with them not end up with the first grizzly bears coming into town in decades end up having to, die because of coming in contact with humans. So it's something that I think is really important to take this on before we have to kill any grizzly bears. Now's the chance to implement some policy here to make Missoula bear smart.
Well, Dan, if anybody among our listeners have any ideas for you on this or anything else you've talked about, how do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you Google City of Missoula, City Council, we've got all of our emails on there and my phone number as well. Or on social media, you could type in my name, Daniel Carlino, and it should pop up for Missoula. And we also do office hours with me and one other council member at the library on Mondays between 3:30 and 5:30 for the through the spring and summer, and we'll continue doing that whenever we can. But I'm always happy to hear from anybody, so feel free to find me on social media or the city website, and we can chat.
Dan, so it's a pleasure to talk with you. Continue to create good trouble here in Missoula. We like it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll keep on doing it.
Thank you so much, Dan. Arnie, I will see you next week.
Take care, Scott.
Thank you for listening to What Do You Know?
I can't wait for the next show, Scott.
I'm excited too, Arnie. If you'd like to suggest a guest, send me an email at scottrichmond@townsquaremedia.com. We'll see you next week. And thanks for listening to Newstalk KGVO.